All right, Christina, thank you so much for being on our show. We're really excited to hear about what you have to say about this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary Grace. I'm really excited too. You sent some great questions, so I cannot wait to dive in.
So we'll just start. Let's just talk about your background and kind of what made you desire to kind of pursue this topic of helping young girls and helping moms and women and families kind of broach the topic of women and their changing bodies and growing up and all that.
Yeah. So it's funny because I was at a recent event not too long ago. One of the tween girls who was attending, like she told her mom that I was like the Catholic period lady.
Oh,
And I was like, oh, that's never really a title that I particularly sought out or wanted. But that's cool, whatever. So I feel like my journey has been rather circuitous, to be perfectly honest. Like I started out in college. I have always loved medicine. I've always loved anything relating to like understanding the body. And so I actually started out pre-med. And then very quickly I realized that I have this love of theology. And so I actually switched my major to do philosophy and theology. And then I had a particular emphasis on the thought of JP2 through the theology of the body. And so that's what I actually wrote my senior dissertation on. So I feel a little bit like coming into the space of educating on cycles and periods and fertility and bodies, like it really started kind of just by recognizing a need. I was doing natural family planning as a young married woman, had my first baby, and was just like floored by the lack of resources available to me to like keep going. And so I decided to become an NFP instructor. And so all of my work has really unfolded from those kind of intimate relationships and conversations that I've had with my clients, other women and men who have said, there's so much out there that we could be talking about and we could be doing better with education. How do we do it? And that it turns out that that's a problem that I love thinking about and have really enjoyed kind of diving into this space and saying there is so much here. How do we just kind of bring it more to regular conversations and make it a more normal part of how we understand our bodies as we're growing up and how we as families pass this along to our children and really create environments in which our children can feel safe and secure and whole in their bodies, even when that's not easy.
Yeah, wow. And with those experiences, then you wrote this book
I
called The Language of
did.
Your Body, Embracing God's Design for Your Body. Can you explain to us kind of what happened there and why you felt the need?
Yeah, so it's hard to describe what this book actually is. People say, is it a book about natural family planning? I'm like, no, it's a book about menstrual cycles. So it's basically it's a book that explores the fact that we have menstrual cycles, right, as women, and as an integral part of womanhood, if we really took this seriously as part of the way that we image God, how would that inform the way that we speak about women, the way that we understand women, the way that we minister to women of all different ages in the church? And so the book is really that sort of exploration of kind of the theology, but also like the pragmatic sort of the practice of bringing this education. But where that came from is being really steeped in theology of the body. One of the main kind of thrusts of that compilation of talks is what JP2 calls the language of the body. And when I was kind of getting deeper into my NFP practice, there's a secular term that is often thrown out, and it's body literacy. And I thought, oh, body literacy is learning to read the language of your body. And it was like this light bulb moment for me. I was like, there's something here. There's a connection here between the very practical aspects of charting your cycle and understanding your cycle, and then being able to apply that to the concepts that JP2 talks about in the theology of body, specifically what he calls the dimension of sign or the sacramentality of the body. So that's all my very geeky way of saying that, that JP2 really inspired this sort of dialogue that I wanted to introduce between the church and between this practice, this very practical thing of charting our cycles and coming to understand our femininity through that lens.
Right. And I think that's very important to remember too, because, we had on the previous show, we had just a kind of general overview of JP2's theology of the body and like, why is it so important? And even now with discussing, the feminine body and looking
Mhm.
into more, as we're going to go more in depth today, it is important to remember, yeah, that's just it's integral to who we are as women, and then as men. So how let's just start, how does a mom or a dad sometimes, if they're single fathers, how do they begin that conversation with their daughters about, you know, this aspect of their life that's coming up, or that they, when do they do it? How young? How old? Just all the,
Yeah. I
the
mean, yeah.
nervousness, the talk.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And really, the answer isn't going to be straightforward. So I'm sorry, parents, if you're listening.
Mhm,
The answer really depends on a lot of things, right? Because daughters are going to go through puberty at very different ages. You could have a girl who goes through puberty starting at age 8. She gets her first menstrual cycle. She has precocious puberty. Or you have a daughter who's like not even started by 16. And obviously, the way that you have those conversations and what you're going to talk to her about is going to be vastly different because she's a very different sort of thinking individual and feeling individual at 8 versus 16.
mhm,
But what I like to tell parents, just to reassure them, is that, talking to your daughters, talking to your sons even about the process of puberty and their changing bodies, it's not one conversation. Now, sometimes we do need to sit down and have one kind of heavy, big conversation when the need pops up. But really, everything that we do in the home to create an environment where our children understand that their bodies are important, that their bodies deserve attention, their bodies deserve care, their bodies are designed good.
mhm,
This is what I call creating a culture of care in the home.
mhm,
And that begins, when the kids are toddlers and can first engage in conversations and make observations about, what they're seeing with your body or what's going on with other bodies. And so I think we can kind of take the foot off the gas pedal in terms of feeling like we have to really rev up and do this one big conversation.
mhm,
And we can kind of travel at our kids' own pace and at our family's own pace.
mhm,
So, ways that I would suggest doing that. Number one, just make sure that you have a really good vocabulary and a kind of way that you talk about bodies that is kind of integrated and wholesome and reflects the goodness of the body.
mhm,
Number two, I would say just be really observant, right? If your child is exhibiting curiosity, right, you want to lean into that and you want to encourage that curiosity because if they're asking questions, they'll ask them of somebody and you want to be the person that they ask them to, right? So observe their curiosity, observe their own personal development, kind of know the signs of puberty and know when you may need to like be proactive and do some proximate education.
mhm,
And also observe what's going on in their friends' lives. And I think this is a big piece that sometimes we forget, is that regardless of whatever timeline our daughter is on, you can guarantee that there are girls on different timelines and that those girls are her friends and her peers, right? And so the more we can do to educate our girls and help them be welcoming, loving, caring, understanding friends for anybody who's going through this change before they do, for example, we can vastly improve the experience of puberty for many more girls besides just our own family. And this is a way that our domestic church can kind of be the hands of Christ in these very small ways, just helping other girls also go through it by our own witness and by what we instill in our kids.
right. Wow. And that actually goes into my next question, because I'm curious what your thoughts are on how, like, the role of modesty plays within
Hmm.
this kind of conversation. So, uh, I would say that this topic is not one that's like kind of talked about a lot just in public circles and everything, because it's a very intimate subject, right? So, because it's about your body, it's about a more intimate part of your body. So, how does modesty in just attire and how you present yourself, but then also modesty in like behavior, I guess, how can that play a role in the discussion of this of puberty and girls' development?
Yeah. Oh, the M word. Yes, it's a good one.
Yeah.
And the thing that I like to remind all of us, and I need to be reminded of this as well, is that modesty is not just about making sure you don't reveal too much,
Mhm.
right? Modesty is a virtue, which means it's a mean, right? It's a middle way. And so true modesty, which kind of is a subset of humility when we look at the virtues and the map of the virtues, um, it's really not revealing too much, but also not revealing too little, right? Modesty is an appropriate revealing,
Mhm.
right? And so, what we need to understand is that out of fear, sometimes we may withhold information that is actually really due to our children, right? As I said, if you observe that they're curious, if you're observing that they're going through these changes, like this, our children are seeking the truth. Our children are seeking answers. And so if we intentionally withhold information because we're afraid, because we're not sure how to talk about it, I would say the same thing applies to like not using proper anatomical terms, right? If we try to obfuscate, right, and to kind of just hide or veil something that really our child now is exhibiting the thirst for, then I think that's also a problem, just the
Mhm.
same way that like revealing too much and dumping too much on them all at once is a problem. And so when we think about modesty in conversations, I think our children really will respond well if we are attentive and we do reveal to them and discuss with them openly what they're genuinely curious about or need to know. And we can take a guideline from this. In 1995, the Pontifical Council for the Family wrote a document called The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality. And it's all about guidelines for sexual morality and chastity education in the home. And they really walk through the developmental stages that our kids go through and what their guidelines and recommendations would be for kind of honoring the natural development and the natural curiosity of the child.
Mhm.
And so you can even familiarize yourself with kind of some of those bullet points there,
Mm.
get a gauge for like, what what do even our church leaders think that we really should be giving and saving at different times in kind of this developmental scheme as our
Mhm.
children grow.
Excellent. What was the name of that document again?
It's The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, 1995. Yeah.
That's great. That's a good year. That's when I was born.
Oh,
Yeah. Just kidding. I love that. Okay, that's actually pretty fascinating coming from the church too, because people always seek the answers from the church. But I love
hmm
that. Okay. And so let's just keep going, deeper into this. So how can, let's say, those questions that these kids have, the curiosities that these girls have, how can parents respond or moms respond when the questions maybe are the ones that the parents deem, oh, not appropriate timing? Like, how would you approach those questions about their bodies or about even sexuality and all those things, like with the mindset of, okay, appropriate age,
hmm
development, all those things, even, because
hmm
kids ask some of the craziest questions and you're like, I don't know
Yeah.
what to tell you. But
Yeah,
why
I
would
mean
you?
that's kind of a loaded question because there's a lot of things going on there. Like sometimes genuinely our kids ask questions that they don't really even understand what they're asking, but they're repeating it, right? So this is
Mhm.
where also just like being really observant and attentive to the child, right? Does this seem like a genuine question that is coming from my child, or does this seem like something that they've heard somewhere else, right?
Mhm.
In which case, your prudential judgment needs to be explaining to your child. That's a really good question. We never reject questions. We always say, thank you so much for asking me that question. That's a really good question. Um, I think that right now is probably not a great time to discuss that. And then maybe you give them a kernel of something that kind of answers that question, but doesn't quite get to it all the way, right? And so an example, I'm going to just try and come up with an example if I can do that off the top of my head. So, right. So like if your child, I don't know, if your child comes to you and is like, she's 8 and she's like, what's a birth control pill?
Yeah, yeah.
And you're like, oh, wow, okay.
Mhm.
So I would say if this is probably a question that's coming from an observation, you can say, how did you find out about that? Where did you hear that term? And so you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, what was she paying attention to? And what may I need to answer for her? And so you can kind of have those stepwise conversations. And maybe you tell her, oh, you know, uh, there are certain types of medications that we have developed that are synthetic hormones,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And sometimes women take these things because they are experiencing hormonal problems, right? And we call those birth control pills. And
Mhm.
maybe she's like, oh, okay, and she runs off, right? Um, but obviously, we know that there's a lot more in that question and in that answer to be
Right.
revealed at a later time. So just make sure that, you give your kids like just give them little nuggets of things and
Mhm.
see where their questions stop and be like, okay. right? I've given enough, even though you know you want to say more and
Mhm.
you're going to need to say more at some point, right? That's not developmentally where they're at.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. The other thing I would say is, sometimes we receive questions as parents that make us uncomfortable and we think, oh, she's not ready for that. But sometimes that's our problem,
Mm.
right? Sometimes we have discomfort or we have shame or we have fear about things that really developmentally it's appropriate for her to be talking about this and for her to know this. Right. And so we have to check ourselves and say, okay, where is this kind of pushback coming from? If it's coming from a place of fear,
Mhm.
if it's coming from an injured place inside of me, then this is a place where I need healing,
Mhm.
right? I need the help of my tribe. So I'm going to turn to my other moms and I'm going to say, okay, how would you do this, right?
Mhm.
But then also like maybe this is an area where I just need some education. And I think this is where I would say my work becomes really important. If I can say that my work is important, I'm allowed to say that,
Yeah.
that I feel like so many of us really did not get a very good understanding of, we didn't have a good model of this sort of education growing up.
Mhm.
We didn't really understand what our cycles were beyond just a period bleed, right? And then for a lot of us, kind of these conversations were basically you're going to have a period, and then it's all about getting pregnant. Here's how you avoid getting pregnant,
Mhm.
right? Like this one big conversation. And
Mhm.
obviously, I think we can see that that's not a great thing to do.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of baggage that we come to these conversations with, and a lot of either misinformation or a lack of information. And that's okay, right? To admit that we have gaps in our own knowledge is not a failure as a parent. It's actually a very wise, prudent thing to say, you know what? I think I'm freaking out about this because I don't know how I would explain this to a 9-year-old. And so maybe I need to take a step back and just get some education and get some resources under my belt so that I feel like I can generously give my daughter my attention and time on this topic. So I feel like it's a very layered question, but really it boils down to, is this something that is genuinely coming from my daughter? Right. And is my response something that is rooted in like a real prudential judgment, or is it rooted in fear? And trying to tease that out in the moment can be really hard. But these are the sorts of things that you just have to kind of one, intentionally prepare for a little bit and think about. And number two, sometimes we just have to play catch up because we didn't even realize like, oh, I didn't know I was going to have that reaction. Let's
Yeah.
check that and we'll come back to this conversation later, and
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay, parents.
Yeah. No, and I'm curious, you had said you were an NFP coach or teacher before.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of information and a lot of education comes from either women learn it later in life or
Right.
they're not experiencing it when they were growing up. So it's like, well, how do I
Yep.
explain that to myself? I was never explained it that way.
Hmm.
Did you notice in your teaching as an NFP instructor, women who are like, I've never heard this before, or like, I had no idea that this was a
Oh,
thing.
all the
And
time, all the time. And that was kind of my experience too. And when I was learning natural family planning, I kind of thought I was like the only one that didn't know this stuff. And then after working with dozens of couples and then hundreds of couples and being like, okay, like this is a common refrain. This
yeah.
is kind of the normal status quo. And it really was my NFP clients, some of them who reached out to me and they said, my daughter is getting to this age and I want to give her this information. I
Mm,
want her to know this about her body, but I have no idea how to explain it to a 10-year-old.
yeah.
Right? Like I don't have the vocabulary. I don't know if I can like explain the science of the menstrual cycle. I'm not entirely sure like how do I talk about hormones? And
Mhm.
so that was when I actually developed my cycle prep program.
Yeah.
And so that's a program right now. It's an on-demand video course and it's for girls aged, I say, the best ages are 9 to 11. It's really for that age group before they get their first period. Girls a little bit younger, a little bit older have done the
Mhm.
program. But it really was this attempt to take the wisdom and the beauty of this knowledge that you can find in natural family planning, to take out the fertility components and really break it down to what can we tell girls about their menstrual cycles that will help them navigate this change more positively, that will equip them to really understand what's going on with their bodies, to understand what's going on with the period, um, and to help them feel prepared for this when it comes.
Mhm.
So that really was something that came out of those conversations with those clients, and has kind of formed the foundation for this kind of model of body literacy that I've been developing through the years.
Yeah, which is exciting because I think that would be so cool. And I mean, I would think I would kind of nerd out about it too, but like so cool to be able to teach that to your daughter because I think that's it's such a beautiful piece of our femininity is like the cycle, like what happens in this phase, what happens in this phase. And to think like, I mean, I learned it a little bit earlier than take one before taking the NFP class, but like it 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 can vastly change kind of your perspective on life, honestly, if you
Hmm.
know it young enough and if you know how to help, like, because it is such a mirror into like your health itself. So,
Yes,
what are some
yes.
things that you maybe touch on in that course that helps these girls really understand their bodies well?
Yeah. So one of the key things that we talk about is that the period, like we build the context of the period. So I actually tell a story, right? So I have these four characters, I have these four hormone helpers, and they have invited this special guest, the egg, to come and stay in the kingdom. And so they have to do all of these preparations. So I talk about luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, progesterone, and the work that they do, but it's all in story form so that the girls can kind of get a narrative of what's going on behind the scenes.
Mhm,
And then that builds the context for the shedding of the uterine lining, right? When we realize the guest isn't coming, right, we're going to strip the guest room and then we're going to build a new one for the next guest, sort of thing. And so it gives them like a story to kind of work through and to understand, okay, this is what I'm seeing when I see a period. It's the culmination of a lot of really good hard work that my body has done. So I have a lot of kind of affirming body positive language in there, the good hard work that your body has done, the important work your body has done in this preparation, but then they understand that ovulation is the main event in the cycle,
mhm,
right? That the period is what we see, but the period is just the culmination of all these other important things, including
mhm,
ovulation. And so then we go through the practicals of like, okay, if you have a period, here are your different options for period products.
mhm,
Here's how to know if your period patterns are normal for your age and healthy for your age. And here's when you would talk to the doctor. We talk about cervical fluid patterns and
mhm,
all of these sorts of things to kind of just really help them understand what's going on in their body.
mhm,
And I can share a personal anecdote. You know, I mentioned the birth control thing earlier. I had that conversation happen with my daughter when I think she was 11 at the time. We were driving. She's sitting in the back seat, and we're talking, and she goes, "Well, why would anybody ever want to take birth control?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, where did she get this? I don't know where this is coming from." So I'm driving and I'm trying not to panic. So I kind of tease out of her, that this has been in conversations about like, you know, uh, uh, not wanting to get pregnant, not wanting to have babies, all this kind of stuff. And so I was explaining to her, what birth control does. It effectively shuts down ovulation so that you can't get pregnant and this kind of stuff. And she's sitting in the back seat and she goes, "Well, but I learned from cycle prep that ovulation is really important for your health." And I was like, "That's really true. Yeah, we did talk about that." And she goes, "So if you turn off ovulation, might that be bad for your health?" And I was like, "Oh, well, that's a very good observation. That's very astute." I said, "Yeah, there can be some health risks to that, et cetera." And so we're kind of having this conversation. And then it comes back around to like the pregnancy
mhm.
prevention aspect. And she goes, "Well, but if the egg is only around for like a couple of days and you didn't want to get pregnant, couldn't you just have sex when you didn't have an egg around?"
She has got this A plus.
That's right. Like 11-year-old in the back seat working this out. But I was like, this is what happens though when you give kids knowledge about their bodies,
Mhm,
right? And knowledge about the way things work is that they're not dummies. They can put
mhm,
two and two together. Now, some parents are going to say, this is why I don't want to teach my daughter about this because she just invented NFP and now she's going to misuse it. And I want to just head off that objection right now because Fem Health is
mhm,
an organization, a fantastic organization, and they have a teen program. And they actually did some studies, and they found that girls in high schools actually were less sexually promiscuous when they understood how their bodies worked. So by giving them information about ovulation and fertility in the teenage years specifically, and even giving them education about like natural family planning methods and things like that, it actually decreased their sexual activity. So girls who had previously been sexually active before now understood, right, the biology of what was going on and actually decrease their sexual activity. And so what I would say is if you're a parent that's concerned about that, obviously there's other ancillary conversations you're going to have.
Mhm.
But the simple fact of giving your daughter education about her body, right? She put two and two together. I did not sit down and say, here's how this works. Here's how you can use it to avoid pregnancy. Go do, go have fun. No, no, no.
Right.
But it is a logical conclusion that your kids can come to. And it really shows what we can do and how we can kind of change even the way that the church thinks
Mhm.
about some of these things by giving our children really good, solid education about the way that their bodies work.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd like to go a little bit more into that. So what steps can the mom take or the dad take to prepare their daughters for puberty? Obviously, you have this excellent course. But are there any other things that you can think of that would be helpful to just kind of jumpstart them and get them ready to embrace this new phase of life?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I say is that kids are going to have their own emotional reactions. Like some girls are naturally excited to go through puberty. They see it as this positive thing. They're excited to buy their first bra. They were excited to do the, whatever. That was not me, right? And that was, I think, not the majority of kids who go through. A lot of kids are going to have very mixed feelings. They may be anxious, they may be uncomfortable. And I think the more that we can just name that as part of the process, rather than trying to erase it, rather than trying to tell our girls, oh, you should be excited, you should feel a certain way. Like we need to honor the feelings that they're experiencing, but then give them the positive vocabulary to still navigate that in a way that helps them understand, like, no, this is messy, this is complicated, this is uncomfortable, but it is a process that's natural and good for your body to be able to go through this process of growth, right? I think sometimes we want to avoid those uncomfortable emotions, and so we try to tell our kids how to feel about things, and then that's just going to backfire, right? Because then they'll say, "Oh, well, if I don't feel good and positive about this change, maybe there's something wrong with me." And that's obviously not what we want to tell our kids, right? There's nothing wrong with you if you hate the way that your breasts are developing asymmetrically.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, like I can laugh about that now, but I remember that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, as much as we can just help our children get through this with the understanding that it's a growth process, it's a transition process, and you don't have to love it, but it is a good, healthy thing for your body to do. And
Mm.
this is what you were designed to do. So I think even something as gentle as that can help us kind of guide our own conversations and open the door to let our kids know that we're a safe space where we can talk about this with them.
Yeah. That's great. And it's a moment of virtue, I think, growing in virtue. Like you don't like something so much, you're not going to go to take drastic measures to change it or to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be tough, but you're gonna get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
that's great. So what resources you have your prep course for the period prep course? What other resources do you have? And your company is Pearl and Thistle. So what other resources do you have to help moms and daughters?
Yeah, so we have a whole parents tab on our website. And I would say like the first thing is if you're curious, kind of just to kind of learn a little bit more about what could be involved in period prep, I do have a small little e-booklet that's called like the Catholic Mom's Guide to First Period Prep. And it really does just lay out, here's some of the things that I think daughters deserve to know before their first period. Here's kind of the guiding science and the guidelines from the Pontifical Council for the Family on where this is appropriate. How do we think about this in stages? And then how do we do the work to prepare ourselves? It's a very quick little booklet, 25 pages, but it's just kind of this little prep thing just for moms to kind of sit and think about what do I want my roadmap to look like? And then from there, I do have Cycle Prep, which is my first period course for girls. And it's designed, all of my resources are designed for parents to do with their children, because I think this is just such a crucial part of that learning experience is that kids learn along with their parents. You have a shared experience of going through materials together. So there's Cycle Prep. And then once girls do start their first periods, I do have a charting guide
Mm,
for girls. It's called Cycle Charting for Girls,
mhm.
and it does not teach fertility, right?
No.
It teaches observation of cervical fluid and just identifying ovulation for health and understanding how periods are different within the first 3 to 5 years and what's kind of normal to see in this time of transition versus when you're an adult. And then I do finally have a teen program that's called why am I blanking? It's called Anatomy, Reproduction, and Fertility for Catholic Teens. And that's for boys and girls. And what it does is it really is this synthesis of the biology. Let's understand the menstrual cycle. Let's understand fertility. Let's understand, how sexual reproduction works, right? And then let's put it in conversation with theology of the body and church teaching, right? How do science and theology actually agree in terms of how we think about what we should be doing with our bodies and the bonding that happens through sexual intercourse. So I have this whole suite of program options for parents and for families.
That's so exciting. Do you have anything else upcoming? Any projects that you've been working on?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I'm filming a parent program right now. So for parents who are like, I don't know that I'm ready to like watch the cycle prep, but I feel like I need information.
Mm,
This is going to be a parent program that's going to be like, here's all the stuff that we didn't receive. Here's all of the different health things that may pop up with teen cycles and how you can help your daughter look for them. Here's a ton of background information on just how you can think about creating this culture of care in your home. Here's what you need to know about, the process of puberty. So really breaking it down for parents and being like, here, if you're not ready to talk to your daughter yet, that's fine, but like you get the information for yourself and then maybe you'll be prepped and ready to go.
that's awesome. Wow, that's really exciting. Very cool. Any final thoughts about this topic? We talked about a lot and there's a lot still that we could talk about, but I'm just curious anything else that you have to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to encourage Catholic parents that um this is just a tricky thing because, as I said, a lot of us never really had a good model of how to do this.
Mhm.
And I feel like parents are really worried, especially in these teen years, like I have to do it perfectly
Mhm.
because I don't want to mess up. This is such a fragile, delicate time in my relationship with my daughter, right?
Mhm.
And so I just want to encourage you that if you're feeling nervous or anything about all of these conversations, number one, there are resources that can help, but number two, like you are the primary educator of your child. That doesn't mean you have to be the sole educator. You can get some help, right? But the primary educator means that you're the person who knows your child best.
Mhm.
And there are many things that you intuit and you understand about your child that I could never intuit or understand on your behalf,
Mhm.
right? And so just trust your instinct, trust the Holy Family to guide you in this. I always say a prayer to the Holy Spirit before I answer my kids on any of these questions. I'm like, okay, Holy Spirit, give me the words. And then, the thing is, if I say the wrong thing, I'll be like, well, Holy Spirit, that's on you because you were
Yeah.
supposed to tell me what to say. Right. So then I have permission to go back and you can always revisit conversations. So as much as I can, I just want to encourage parents to like not put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect. You're never going to be perfect, but you do have divine grace to support you.
Mhm.
And and you really were given this task by God, and that's not a pressure thing, that's a grace thing. So hopefully that's a little bit of encouragement to any parents who are still feeling maybe a little bit nervous about the way that they might approach some of these things with their kids.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And where can our parents find what's your website? Where do you have any social media? Where can our parents find you and learn more about this?
Yeah, so my website, I've tried to keep everything very simple. So my business name is Pearl and Thistle. So my website is Pearl and Thistle, all spelled out. And my Instagram and Facebook are the same, just at Pearl and Thistle, all spelled out one word.
So easy. We love that. That's so great. Okay. I have one last question for you. And it's not posted right now in this podcast, but it'll be posted in like a montage thing. But it's
I love it.
how has Mary, Blessed Mother, been a mother to you?
Hmm. Okay, so this is going to sound a little cheesy, maybe, but I did go to the University of Notre Dame for my undergrad, and I was a frequent visitor of the grotto. And Mary and she got me through a lot of, really tumultuous things in college. She was there for me in a very tangible way in that very holy, precious space. But as a mom, she has guided me in many different ways, and she's done it very gently. So she usually connects me with other people, is the way that Mary's relationship works with me. So she brought me to St. Dominic. And so I am a life professed lay Dominican. She has brought me to a number of other mom saints who are now my friends. And so as a mother, she really has been a connector for me, I think, is the way that I view her. Always leading me to her other children who she knows I need their help. can
Yeah,
use can use the camaraderie and the fellowship. So that's the way that she has really mothered me over these years.
I love that. That's so different and unique. I love that. That's very cool. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah.
And then thank you so much for being on our show and giving your expertise in this very awesome topic and very cool topic. And we hope our parents really take what you've said and kind of bring that into their own lives and their own conversations with their children.
Thank you so much, Mary Grace. It's been a lot of fun.